So, what's the first thing that comes to mind when someone asks you about Malaysia? Is it the fact that we're a tiny country next to Singapore? Because that's the most triggering response any Malaysian could get. Especially because we're 327,498 square kilometers in size, making us just about 473 times bigger than our neighboring compatriots. For those abroad, I've had girl guides ask me at international jamborees whether we still lived on trees back in Malaysia. And not out of spite, but out of genuine curiosity. And then, of course, there's the mass media perception of Malaysia, in which everyone knows how we were involved in the 1MDB scandal, or that we now own the equanimity, or that we have a 93-year-old man as our prime minister for the second time in history. But there's so much more to it than all of that, to be Malaysian. And just like kueh lapis, a national confectionery of layered glutinous rice being put together, being Malaysian is about having so many different layers of diversity, personality traits, culture, background, education, and more. And so the reason as to why I'm putting up this picture of such broad perspectives and this wide spectrum is because even within Malaysia itself, this whole spectrum of perspectives, and not just perspectives and opinions anymore, but opportunities as well, depicts such a stark disparity. And I can think of 4 reasons as to why this happens. The first being social divides and basic stereotypes. The fact that we come from so many different ethnic groups or different cultures and have so many different backgrounds, speak so many different languages and dialects, obviously causes a bit of a divide amongst those in Malaysia. The little trivial things, like the fact that Malays have dinner probably 2 hours later than a regular Chinese family. Or that everyone believes that basketball is a sport dominated by the Chinese in Malaysia, and that only Indian people play cricket.
Yes.
The second thing would probably be vernacular education. So in Malaysia, we've got public schools, private schools, international schools, but besides that, we also have the Chinese independent schools and the Tamil vernacular schools. And so in those schools, you'd have about 99% of the people comprising of a single race. And while it's great that you're surrounded by people who can relate to you and come from similar backgrounds, it also creates a bit more of a difficulty when it comes to communicating with people of different ethnicities, of different races, especially later on in the working force. And I also believe that it causes a bit of an unwholesome deficit of knowledge in terms of religious and cultural understanding of others. So the third thing that causes inequality in Malaysia would be race-based politics. With affirmative action and preferential policies in terms of scholarships, business startups, land rights for the Bumiputras, the Malays, the indigenous people, it's caused decades of dispute and controversy. Many people even believe that the beneficiaries of these policies are not just reliant on them, but are indoctrinated to believe that their sole survival depend on these policies. For instance, this has been so widely disputed because it's caused decades of inequality, nepotism, and corruption. And the last reason I can think of would be our exposure to mass media and education equity. So we have tons of influential Twitter famous people who are keyboard warriors fighting for things like the LGBTQIA, trying to raise awareness about child marriage in Malaysia and all these different issues that are so important to them. But relative to a whole bunch of people in the more rural parts of Asia, the kind of concerns and social issues that we're worried about are two completely different things. And this lack of common ground makes it slightly more difficult to communicate or have things in common with one. And so for a long time, I asked myself, where do I stand on this spectrum? Where are my political beliefs and what are my social values? To what extent of which spectrums do I stand on and how far? And so here's my story. Coming from a public school in central KL, which is the capital city of Malaysia, my school was located about 5 minutes away from the most expensive international school in KL, where you'd find people coming to school every day in BMWs and carrying branded bags. That being said, we were also about 5 minutes away from one of the poorest areas in Kuala Lumpur, where you'd see kids coming to school on motorbikes with no helmets, faded pinafores, and dirty school shoes. In my school, 80% of the people I associated myself with were probably all Malay, though it looked racially ambiguous. They weren't exactly the same as those expats from international schools, but they were far more privileged than those from the rural areas that we were just talking about. So put all of them somewhere in the middle of this wide spectrum. As for me, I spent 6 years of my life dancing for the national traditional Malay team. I fasted with my friends during Ramadan out of respect. I could barely speak Mandarin. I was accustomed with the Malay greeting of salam, where you take someone's hand and put it to your forehead when you see them. I'm in love with Indian saris, and I'm always in awe of the intricacies of the Bharatanatyam. Back in school, some of my religious teachers even called me Ruqyah because they thought I was more Malay than I was Chinese. Yet at home, I loved my Chinese chicken herbal soup and did calligraphy with my grandpa for hours. And so the more I thought about this spectrum of ideas and where I stood on it and who I was and how I identified myself in terms of culture, in terms of education, in terms of exposure I got in, the more I realized that these things didn't matter. Because it wasn't about all these differences that was so special about being Malaysian, but it was about the similar things that we had. And trust me when I say that, we've got more things in common than you think. It's about the little things that makes us Malaysian, from the fact that we're all kiasu in some extent, which literally translates to afraid of losing. The fact that we use slang like chill lah, what time is it lah, ayo, like this again ah. Or the fact that we use the power of the hand, a superpower when crossing roads because somehow it stops traffic, and also a sign of apology when every time you cut someone's lane on the road. And while British people will tell you that the three things you never speak about during a formal dinner include money, religion, and politics, every Malaysian would tell you that those are the exact three things we speak about at breakfast, tea, lunch, tea, dinner, and supper. Also because we eat about 7 times a day. More importantly though, being Malaysian means being united over the fact that we wait till 4 a.m. at Mamaks, which are 24-hour open-air establishments, just to watch Lee Chong-wei try to win the gold medal at the Olympics for the 3rd time in a row. And being a Malaysian means being bonded by our love for food, be it Nasi Lemak, which is coconut-infused rice with anchovies and cucumbers and spices, to the infinite variety of kueh. Being Malaysian means calling everyone auntie and uncle, regardless of how well you know them or whether or not they're strangers, because somehow we're all family. And being Malaysian also means being extremely punctual, so much so that 8 a.m. Malaysian timing is understood to be 8:30 in the morning. Ultimately though, it's about celebrating all these differences, cultural festivities, enjoying all the public holidays, as well as immersing ourselves in all the different cultures in terms of food, clothing, practices that Malaysia has to offer. Compassion, empathy, and mutual respect, three of values that are in line with KTJ's school values, are things that are so important in order to not just merely be tolerant of one another, but to properly understand and accept each other as a community. And so now I'm saying embrace all these differences and learn to not just be tolerant, but to really, truly understand these things. A reflection of unity in Malaysia was May 9th, coming together for the first time to vote against a government that had been ruling since our independence in 1957. It reflected a sign of unity because it showed how we came together to fight for our rights, to fight for a better future for the future generation. And regardless of race, religion, the fact that people were losing some of the comparative advantages and risking so much in terms of change, we came together to vote against what we believed was an injustice and what we believed was for the betterment of our country. This wasn't just a historical election or something that reflected on unity, but this year's elections in Malaysia brought along hope. It brought along hope for a new Malaysia, and it brought along hope for inclusiveness. It brought along hope for less sensitivity and suspicion amongst all the races. and it brought along hope for meritocracy and need-based policies, and ultimately hope for progressive change. All in all, there is no better time than right now to get involved in public advocacy of original ideas through speech, drama, debate, platforms like this, to be part of youth activism groups, especially now that the voting age has just been reduced to 18, and to really speak up for what you believe would be for the betterment of the future. What I'm trying to ultimately say is grab all these opportunities, fully immerse yourself in all the different things, the different cultures, and the diversity that Malaysia has to offer you. These new things, try a new kuih every day and for the next year, I'm sure you wouldn't run out. Because ultimately, only together will we be able to work towards transformation and progressive change. So to a new Malaysia and to hope ahead. Thank you.